Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was a gamer between dimensions. When a boy wakes up in the world of Naruto with no memory of the past, foggy memories of the future, and a convenient gamer-like ability, so what's he to do? The only option is to get stronger and move forward. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard! Chapter 28. Time was like a river. I had no idea whether one could swim in the opposite direction of its flow, or stop its flow, or even reverse it. But it didn't matter to me. I simply rode with the flow of the river of time. And here I was now. My toes pointed to the sky and my shirtless body supported by my arms. I balanced myself on the ground with my eyes closed. Sweat dripped down my head at rapid speeds and slammed into the ground, penetrating it slightly. All due to my barrier Fuin, gravity field, X10. Rods made from my crystallized energy, courtesy of ice release, were placed in each of my cardinal directions. Each rod had a specific seal engraved on it which allowed the energy in them to resonate with each other and create this gravitational effect. The seal lasted as long as the chakra I placed into the poles did, but it was more than effective for my training. I had not been idling this past nearly 3 years. Since the Four Tails attack nearly 3 years ago, my schedule had been to simply use clones for Fuinjutsu research and personal training. I still didn't have access to my stats, however, judging from the growth I had been feeling these past few years, my lack of status clearly didn't affect my ability to increase my strength. Though I personally wasn't as strong as I'd like. System update, 96.67%. Almost there. I thought before pushing myself off the ground with my hands. My feet roughly landed on the ground, cratering it slightly from the gravity and my weight. I stood up completely and looked at my hands before clenching them tightly, the cracking sounds of my bones audible in response. I then looked down at my body and nodded in appreciation. At close to 14 years old, I was around 5 feet 6.5 inches, though apparently, I looked a couple of years older than I actually was. My white hair was slightly longer and swayed slightly in the wind. The distribution of my muscles was impeccable. Their size was perfect for my frame. And their separation. Yep, I was incredibly beautiful. My expression exuding tranquility, I slid my arms to my sides and crouched low. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, the fresh but heavy air flowing through my lungs. I exhaled. My eyes snapped open. I took a step forward with my right leg simultaneously shooting out my right arm. A powerful blast of compressed air shot out from my punch and devastated the forest in front of me. Trees were uprooted and the ground was torn from the force of my punch, the destruction traveling a few kilometers in the distance. I took another breath. And then relaxed. I waved my hand, the poles of ice dissipating in response and the gravitational field around me vanished. After rotating my shoulders a bit and hearing a few satisfying cracks, I looked to the distance for a bit. A fearsome roar suddenly sounded out from the depths of the forest in front of me. No sooner did a gigantic white snake pop her body out from the tree lines, 18 meters of her form visible from where I stood. She roared once more and breathed out an incredible torrent of white flames at the trees around her, the scalding heat reaching my skin despite the distance separating us. After a moment she stopped and opened her mouth before diving back down below the tree lines where I couldn't see her anymore. I waited. Suddenly, a small meter-long snake shot out from the trees in front of me and quickly slithered up my leg before wrapping around my arm. I tilted my head. How were the werewolves, Livia? She stuck out her adorable forked tongue and paused, before she burped, a little plume of fire accompanying the sound. She then turned her gaze towards me. I could hold on to my indifferent facade no longer. You're too damn cute, I said as I rubbed my face against hers in glee. Livia hissed in embarrassment before wrapping the rest of herself around my neck and resting her head on my shoulders. I looked at her with a smile before focusing on my surroundings. ID escape. The space around me shattered like glass and I found myself in the same place as before, except now, I could hear sounds other than my and Livia's breathing. That and the sky was blue instead of red. And the sun was its normal color. With but a thought, I clothed myself with a henge and looked to the distance in the direction of Konoha. Usually, I would go back to Konoha before exiting my ID, however, a short while back Minato had completed the setup for the spacetime barrier he had placed around Konoha. It was extremely powerful, so much so that whenever I used ID create/escape or any other spacetime technique like my Yamanoto Kotachi, while inside Konoha, I would be launched away and out of the city. It was quite an inconvenience. Because of that, I had to go back into the village in the old-fashioned way. By walking through the front gates. While thinking about how much of a nuisance this was, I made my way back to Konoha with a few powerful leaps and arrived in front of the city's gates. The guards looked at me and ushered me in, having recognized me and my chakra signature since I went out quite a lot. With a nod of acknowledgement, I made my way inside the village and walked around for a bit, appreciating the ambience of the whole place. The village was buzzing with quite the energy as people moved to and fro towards their various destination. Peddlers on the street did their best to attract customers while some tourists admired the sights the village had to offer. I took this all in before looking to the distance towards the center of the village. That was where all the real excitement was located. Ever since the Four Tails attack, Konoha had decided to make a statement by rebuilding and completely upgraded the area that had been destroyed by the Bijou. Buildings reaching higher than 25 to 50 meters were quite common around that part of town, with a variety of new sights and attractions which grasped at the attention of travelers. The tallest building right at the center of town was a 100-meter tall, mainly glass-composed, building that served as a hotel of sorts. It was basically the signature attraction. People from all over came to Konoha due to its attractions, which caused businesses around here to boom in both the shinobi and economic aspects of things. Konoha now had more missions sent our way, while simultaneously, we experienced an increase in trade and immigration into the village. Despite all this, I truly didn't care much. I turned away from the festivities and walked towards the more depressing parts of town. With a few twists and turns, I found myself on the outskirts of Konoha's cemetery and walked in without pause. As I traveled to the graveyard, I looked around and noted the names of the many people who had died for this place. The only thing they got in return for their sacrifice was a rock with their names imprinted on it. I never planned on having my name there. Suddenly, I paused in front of a tombstone. My expression was dispassionate as I read the short epithet written on it. In memory of Obito Uchiha, a shinobi who sacrificed himself for his comrades. Dutifully served his clan and the village. Gave everything for a brighter future. And our prosperity. I bent down to one knee and dusted it off a little before I looked to the ground and noticed that a vase containing flowers had tipped over. I picked it up and placed it in its correct position in front of the tombstone before I looked through the flowers. They weren't too decayed, but they weren't as fresh as they should have been, causing them to look a little stale. I took them out and used a little bit of earth manipulation to bury them underground. Next, I opened the palm of my right hand and concentrated for just a moment. Immediately, my chakra gathered to my hand and caused a crystal of ice to form and shape itself into a beautiful blue crystalline flower. With that, I placed it in the transparent vase with a ding as the ice flower hit the bottom of the container. I stood up and dusted my legs off. Livia hissed at me in concern. I smiled and stroked her chin. "I'm fine," I said as I looked back at the tombstone, my gaze becoming hollow. Time passed. "Ah! Here you are. Yoru." Two voices spoke up behind me. I turned my head to look over my shoulder and saw Rin waving behind me while Kakashi was next to her with a bundle of some fresh flowers. I nodded at them and looked back at Obito's tombstone. In but a few moments, they appeared on either side of me, Kakashi to my left kneeling down to place the flowers inside the vase. He paused, however, as he looked at the crystal flower I had created. "Thank you," Kakashi said as he placed his flowers inside the vase around the one I had created. Rin's eyes slightly sparkled. "It's so pretty," she said as she watched the light refract off the ice crystal flower, creating a memorable picturesque view. I opened the palm of my hand in front of me and focused for a moment before some ice began to gather together and form into a multi-layered translucent flower. As it floated on my palm while glimmering in the sunlit sky, I looked at Rin and stepped forward towards her before attaching it to her hair on the side of her head. She looked at me wide-eyed. "Yoru." Looking closely at Rin and into her eyes, I realized just how beautiful she really was. She had slightly grown out her hair till it reached past her shoulders, which made her appear even more charming in my opinion. Her chest had also grown with her age, which was always a plus, and now her appeal was even greater. Immediately, I stopped myself, realizing that I had gotten oddly close to Rin, causing her face to be dyed a light shade of red. I smiled and separated from her before turning away. This again. I, of course, had always been attracted to women, but as of late I had been more attracted than usual. Internally shaking my head, I looked back at Obito's grave and stayed silent for a moment before saying, "His body is still out there." Kakashi and Rin perked up at that and turned to look at me. I continued, "Soon I will get it, and bring it back here." Along with my promise, I pulled out a kunai and twirled it around my finger for a moment while my mind was in deep thought for a moment. I snuck a glance at Rin for a moment and thought about what my promise truly entailed. I removed those distracting thoughts and engraved an Amanoto Kotachi mark on the kunai before inserting it into the ground in the center of the grave. Their expressions were that of surprise at my declaration. Silence reigned for a moment longer. "Thank you," Rin said softly as she continued to gaze at the tombstone. "For everything." I patted both her and Kakashi's head, the latter gently removing my hand off his cranium. "Don't worry your pretty little head over it," I said. I suddenly paused. Looking down at the ground, I saw a small white snake moving about in the grass as it approached me. In but a few moments, it arrived at my feet, so I bent down and picked it up, prompting Livia to stare at the little girl sharply. I chuckled. "Jealousy doesn't suit you." Hiss. "Sure, you're not," I said before patting Livia's head and looking at the little critter in my hand. "What's up?" The little snake hissed a few times while I nodded along with what she was saying. I could swear that Rin and Kakashi were looking at me oddly. After everything was said and done, the snake puffed and vanished, prompting me to place my hands back at my side. "Seems like I'm needed for something, so I'll be taking my leave," I said as I looked at them. Kakashi looked at me and nodded. Rin smiled with her hands clasped behind her back. I looked at them and at Obito's grave once more before vanishing in a burst of speed. Body flicker. Yoru, gamer dash. I walked down the corridor of the dimly lit underground tunnel areas Danzo tended to stay in. It was supposed to symbolize how the root organization, was located under the ground and beneath the tree, Kanoma, or it supported the tree from below, or something to that effect. Along with the conclusion to my thoughts, I arrived at a normal-sized steel door. I knocked. "Come in." Nodding to myself in affirmation, I entered the room and came face to face with Danzo Shimura, who was patiently sitting behind the desk. Sensing two chakra signatures, one familiar and one not, I turned my gaze towards the other occupants in the room. One was a man with pale skin, slitted golden eyes, and long white hair with black streaks running through them. His face had soft features that made him look somewhat androgynous and gave him a very youthful appearance. It was Orochimaru. He grinned my way. I acknowledged him with a slight smirk before I turned towards the other occupant in the room who was standing beside Orochimaru. He was a boy with onyx eyes and ash-gray hair, which he kept in a ponytail. His most distinguishing features were his black-rimmed circular glasses. He looked at me before adjusting his glasses, pushing them up slightly and causing the glare of the light reflecting off his lens to intensify. Huh, interesting kid. I turned back to Danzo. You wanted to see me, Lord Danzo? He nodded his head and paused before looking at me in thought for a moment. You know, you're technically not a registered shinobi of this village, you're not even supposed to exist. I wasn't aware that had ever been a problem, I asked in interest. It's not, and in fact. Danzo began as he tapped his finger on the table, it's a solution. I tilted my head and looked at him in interest, signaling him to continue. His expression remained calm. As you know, Sunagakure is hosting the Chunin exams this year, and while Konoha usually sends a few teams, there just hasn't been many good seeds as of recently. After talking with the Hokages, we decided that instead of risking making a fool out ourselves by sending out teams of underqualified genin, we could simply send a single elite team composed of our most powerful genin and have you lead it. Silence reigned between us. I looked him in the eyes. You hate children? The kid next to Orochimaru chortled with a pft at my comment. Danzo's eye twitched ever so slightly. I continued. Sending me there would be a slaughter, I said before stating. And if that isn't enough, you want to send 2 other people with me to compete against those children? Of course, I didn't really care about any of that, but it did prompt me to ask. So, who are the fortunate individuals who get to be partnered up with me? It was at this point that Orochimaru spoke up while patting the shoulder of the boy beside him. Allow me to introduce you to Kabuto Yukushi. He shows great aptitude not only as a shinobi, but also as a medic nin, so I've taken him under my wing as well. Orochimaru grinned, do take care of him. Kabuto pushed up the rim of his glasses. While I may not be much compared to you, I don't believe I will bring down the team. I'll be in your care, Yoru. I regarded him and nodded. You're much stronger than average for people around your age. I don't doubt you'll be fine. I then looked back at Danzo. And who's the other one? Someone you are quite familiar with. Danzo began. Itachi Uchiha. I paused at that statement and tilted my head. Itachi. Shouldn't he be a Chunin by now? How is it that he can participate in the Chunin exams? Danzo explained. If you remember, over 3 years ago, Itachi's teammates were killed during a mission. It was due to that Itachi didn't partake in the Chunin exams. I nodded as all that information was already known to me. Seeing this, Danzo continued. Of course, the Chunin exams are held biannually, and at that time, we had been the ones hosting it. The Konoha officials had planned to allow Itachi to take it alone because he was no doubt capable, but he requested to abstain and instead joined Root. My eyes slightly widened in shock. I hadn't known about that part at all. Granted, I technically wasn't part of Root anymore and also hadn't been part of it at that point in time, so I didn't have the qualifications to know, but still. I shook my head. I see. And he never tried to take the Chunin exams afterward? He did not. Was Danzo's reply. So, I decided that in this case scenario, I would have him participate. Maybe with you in the team, he would be more motivated than otherwise. I simply nodded before asking. When do we leave? In around an hour, Orochimaru stated. I'll be your guiding Jonin sensei for your team, so I'll be tagging along. Neat. I blandly replied. I want you to deliver a message to the shinobi villages who are against us. Danzo began, a deep coldness in his tone. Kill all those who target you, and make an example of them. Make sure they understand Konoha's dignity is not to be trifled with. Danzo stated as a calm expression settled on his face. Do, however, make sure to put on your headband as you will be representing your village. I internally rolled my eyes and took my leaf headband out of my inventory before wrapping it around my neck. Where are we going to meet? Near the east gate, Orochimaru replied. Itachi has already been called to the occasion, we will all meet up there and leave together. I gently ran my hand through my hand and exhaled lightly. A few thoughts went through my mind for a moment before I turned around and walked towards the door. I'll meet you guys there then. Give me a few moments. After reaching the door, I opened and exited the place before closing the door behind me. Yoru, gamer. The Chunin exams? Kushina asked incredulously while Naruto frolicked on her lap. Minato hadn't told me about this? Why would they send you there? I shrugged lightly. Sending a message, Konoha is not to be trifled with, etc., etc., I replied half-caringly. I suppose this is a good way to end it though. I muttered. Kushina tilted her head. And what? I shook my head. Nothing dash. Mama. I'm hungry. Naruto yelled as he looked up at Kushina with his bright blue eyes. His hair was blonde, but with bright red highlights in some areas, and his frame was petite as would be expected from a child that was almost 3. Kushina took a deep breath and sighed before she turned a pleading gaze at me. With slight amusement in my visage, I took out a disposable plate of food from my inventory and handed it to Kushina, who visibly expressed her relief and whispered a quick thanks. Well, regardless, though I know you can take care of yourself. She paused and stared at me seriously. Please watch your back. You'll be in foreign territory, and while Sunigakure may be our ally, that doesn't mean they won't turn a blind eye if something were to happen to you. You should save your worries for my opponents. She gave a short chuckle and shook her head before continuing. Considering how frighteningly powerful you already are, how much potential you have, and how well known you currently are, I wouldn't be surprised if you were targeted the very moment everyone sees you. I tilted my head. That actually must be why the announcement of our team was made last minute. That makes sense. Kushina stated with a thoughtful expression. If the other villages knew you were competing beforehand, you would probably run into some problems along the way. She explained while feeding Naruto, who ate with glee. I nodded. Not to mention the other villages could also act shamelessly and send out fake genin as well, not that it would really be a problem for me. Kushina smiled before she asked in interest. What about that last kid with you? You haven't really mentioned him much. I don't have much to say, I replied. Kabuto is definitely much stronger than most shinobi his age, but that's all I know about him. Since Orochimaru has taken a liking to him, he must be something interesting. Kushina scoffed. Anything that Snake takes an interest in is definitely something you want to stay as far away from as you reasonably could. I opened my mouth, but soon after closed it. I suppose she didn't need to know how much of a vested interest Orochimaru had in me. Before he obtained his immortality and whatnot. Speaking of. Kushina began as she looked at me carefully. Seeing that new makeover of his and how much younger looking he's become. She narrowed her eyes. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? Dearie me, would you look at the time? I said as I popped off the chair. I'll be late for my appointment with my teammates, do tell Mito that I'll be out for a bit. I quickly walked away. Yoru. Bye-bye, Naruto stated with his mouth full. Amanoto Kotachi. Kushina looked at the kunai on the floor that had taken Yoru's place before her expression turned unsightly, veins protruding from her face. I told you not to do that in the house. What if Naruto stumbled on it when I wasn't looking? She huffed. Next time I should just put a space-time barrier around the place. In a blink, I appeared right outside the front gate of Konoha, a little way away from the effective range of the space-time barrier covering the village. Since I hadn't tried to teleport to a place within the village, I wasn't launched out nor did I activate the barrier's alarm system since there would be no point. I took out a kunai and twirled it between my fingers for a moment before inscribing my Amanoto Kotachi mark on it. With that, I jammed it into the ground and stepped out from behind the tree I had appeared from. Even from where the Uzumaki Namikaze household had been, I had been able to immediately sense the three familiar chakra signatures that were grouped together around this area. Orochimaru, Kabuto, and Itachi's chakra signatures were clearly sensed by my energy resonance. I could see those three individuals a short distance away and, as I approached, they all turned to face me. Itachi regarded me with a nod to which I replied in kind. It seems like we're all present, I stated as I turned my gaze towards Kabuto then towards Orochimaru, the former adjusting his glasses in response while the latter remained smiling. Then, let's get this game over with. We vanished in a burst of speed. Yoru, gamer. Our journey to Sunagakure was completely uninterrupted. Of course, there were the occasional bandits and wild animals that we ran into, but they couldn't even be considered minor inconveniences. The trip here was pretty quiet. I already talked to Itachi often enough and I wasn't really interested in getting to know Kabuto, though he seemed like a decent enough individual. As for Orochimaru, I usually refrained from talking to him while I had Livia on me since I didn't want him to be a bad influence on her, though that might already be a lost cause. Speaking of. Hiss. No. Hiss hiss. Not at all. Hiss. We're almost there, be patient. Hiss? I rolled my eyes. Yes, we are finally here. Welcome to Sunagakure. Can you really understand what she's saying? Itachi asked as he looked at Livia and me peculiarly. Yep. Itachi opened his mouth before promptly closing it and furrowing his brows. How? Natural talent. He just stared at me blankly. Foo. Orochimaru chuckled at our interaction before leveling a small smile at us. Yoru is undoubtedly a man of many talents, but so are you, little Itachi. Itachi blinked a couple of times. Thank you. All the while, Kabuto remained more or less inconspicuous as he followed us while standing beside Orochimaru, the glare of his glasses preventing anyone from seeing his eyes. As we walked closer to the gates of Sunagakure and followed the crowd of merchants, mercenaries, nobles, and other shinobi, I decided I might as well talk to this enigmatic fellow whom I knew nothing about. Tell me something, Kabuto. I began before slightly glancing his way. Who are you? The atmosphere around him instantly changed. I halted as I sensed a whirlwind of conflicting and complex emotions swooshing around in his body and noticed that he too had stopped walking at my seemingly simple question. Itachi and Orochimaru too stopped walking while the latter looked at Kabuto with slightly furrowed brows. Well, it seemed like he had a complicated past. Never mind, I said as I shifted my gaze ahead and continued moving. You don't have to explain. There was a short silence before I heard his voice. I have no memories of my childhood, so I am unable to answer your question, however. I turned to face him and saw that his eyes were staring into mine, the glare from his glasses no longer present. I am trying to understand who I am currently. For now, though, I am merely Kabuto Yukushi, a medicnine of the Leaf Village and an apprentice to Orochimaru. I nodded to myself before commenting. If you want to discover yourself or whatever, it helps to have some sort of goal to achieve. I gave him a side glance. Do you have something of the sort? My desire is to find out who I was. Kabuto stated. Maybe then. As he remained silent in thought after that, I merely nodded. Well, I hope you achieve your goals. Thank you. As the line of people looking to enter Sunagakure, no doubt for the upcoming Chunin exams, moved forward, we eventually arrived in front of the guarded entrance to the village. Sunagakure only had a single entrance and exit which was restricted to a single cleft between two cliff faces. Additionally, since the village lay on a fortified valley behind cliffs of rock, the area was well defended and was very hard to attack from the ground. Halt! One of the guards on the ground in front of us stated. He and the other guards wore the traditional Sunagakure shinobi outfits which consisted of blue or black uniforms underneath flak jackets of various shades of beige which allows them better blend with their natural environment. This was included with shoulders guards, and they additionally wore headpieces consisting of a head wrap and cloth neck covers to protect against the harsh weather. The guard gave us a quick glance before focusing on Orochimaru, his expression slightly grave in recognition. "What business do you have here?" Orochimaru, that grin ever present on his face, stepped forward and handed a scroll to the guard. The Sune shinobi promptly grabbed the scroll from Orochimaru's hands and opened it before reading through it. After a while, he relaxed slightly. "The Hokage's official seal," he stated as he handed back the scroll. "You're free to pass." Orochimaru pocketed the scroll and stepped forward past into the cleft, followed by Kabuto and Orochimaru. However, as I moved forward to enter the village, I felt the guard gaze at my face seriously. As I raised a brow before turning to face him, his pupils suddenly constricted intensely and he took a step back. "Why you?" I blinked. "Me?" Seeing his reaction, the other guards looked my way, before their expressions began to change, and they became on edge. The sudden change in atmosphere caught the attention of my three other compatriots who had yet to fully enter the village, and they turned back to face me. While Itachi and Kabuto looked okay with their interests piqued, Orochimaru looked on with a knowing smile. "Come now, Yoru, we need to find lodging for our stay." I glanced at the shinobi guards for a brief moment before following my team inside, all the while the guards behind me seemed to have turmoil-ridden emotions. Maybe they were having issues coping with how adorable I was? Seeing someone as cute as myself must have been a shock for their eyes. "What do you think, Livia? My handsomeness definitely shocked them silly, right?" She gave me a lazy dull glance. Hiss. Of course, they were. What else would they be shocked by? Hiss. Oh please, that bingo book entry has been outdated from day one. If they're scared because of what was written in that thing 3 years ago, then they might as well roll over for me now. She looked at me blankly. Hiss. I paused before shaking my head and moving along. No matter how arrogant I appear to be, every action of mine is well calculated to provide me with the most optimal results. Anything extra is simply for my amusement. She rolled her eyes. Hiss. Of course, it is. Do you really have to doubt me so much? I heard a laugh in front of me and turned to see Itachi chuckling at my antics. You and she seem to be able to really understand each other. He then tilted his head and furrowed his brows slightly. Seriously, how do you understand her? I'm not sure. I stated honestly before I shrugged my shoulders. It probably has something to do with the fact that the snake sage bit me and poisoned my body with snake-attributed natural energy, or something. Itachi blinked. What? Either that or I'm just a natural genius. I'm more inclined to believe the latter. Itachi just stared at me blankly for a moment before he raised a brow as a light smile made its way on his face. Shaking his head helplessly, he continued to move forward. I followed behind him for a couple of paces before my ears twitched. I paused for a moment and turned my gaze to the side to see a team of 3 Kumo shinobi who were led by the 8-Tails Jinchuriki. I had already sensed his chakra earlier but hadn't really cared since he had nothing to do with me. The person I was looking at, however, a young man with dark eyes and short, blonde hair wearing the standard kimonin attire, had been looking my way for some time. Parallel processes, which acted as my second brain, had caught wind of a couple of the things he had said with my enhanced hearing, and I found his conjectures intriguing. He was quite interesting, so I gave him a smile and a short wave before walking along with my team. For the sake of him and his team, I hoped we didn't meet as enemies during the exams. I would have to eliminate them if we did. Yoru, gamer. That's him. A man stated as he observed Yoru and his team's approaching form from the distance. The young man had dark eyes and short, blonde hair which he wore parted in the front. He wore the standard attire of kimonin, a sleeveless, black shirt with a one-strap over one shoulder white flak jacket, black forehead protector, characteristic black, elbow-length arm guards, and the red and white Kumogakure shin guards along with a pair of sandals. Is that so? Another man replied blandly. He was a dark-skinned man with a slightly bulbous nose, black eyes that usually look bored, and shaggy, white hair which covered his left eye. He wore a high-collared, sleeveless uniform with loose-fitting pants, bandages on his wrists and the one strap over one shoulder flak jacket typical of a Kumogakure shinobi. In addition to this, he had stylized characters for water and lightning tattooed on his right and left shoulders respectively. What's he got to do with us anyway, see? Either everything or nothing at all, C stated as a grave look appeared in his eyes. He suddenly appeared in Iwagakure's bingo books as some prodigy Konoha shinobi that no one had heard of before then. Forgetting his bounty and threat assessment, he was only 11, yet Iwagakure deemed it necessary to rank him as an S-rank threat. What does that tell you? Who knows? Who cares? Darui replied in a laid-back manner. C closed his eyes and took a deep breath before opening them. It means he either pissed off Iwagakure extensively, frightened them with his abilities, or a combination of both. Incredible, Darui said in a bored tone. C's eyes sharpened. And to make matters more interesting, it was found that Iwagakure's bingo book was updated not long after the Four Tails attack. Darui perked up ever so slightly, though his overall posture staved off any suggestion that he was actually interested in the subject matter. So, C began. He must have done something during or promptly after the Four Tails attack that pissed off or frightened Iwa's higher-ups. C then paused in thought for a moment. The only issue is that no one knows how they obtained such information about him. Not even us, Kumo, Kiri, or Suna seem to have any more information than that which we obtained from IWA. Darui sighed. Just avoid him then. It seems like trying to go up against him is more troublesome than it is worth. That's truthfully the best course of action, but... C looked at Yoru even more intently. Have you read his complete profile in the bingo book? Darui looked up at C mellowly. I looked at his threat assessment and bounty before skipping to the next page. That was all the information I needed to realize that he wasn't worth the risk. C's brows twitched before he took out the black bingo book from his back pocket and flipped through the pages before handing it to Darui. Just read through it. Darui took it and read through the profile before handing the black book back to C. I'm now gladder than ever that I decided not to bother with him. That's not the point, C stated as he rubbed his forehead. Did you not see his list of skills? He has access to a space-time technique of unknown function. Do you understand what this means? Darui blinked. That he likes to spam the summoning jutsu often? A vein bulged on C's head. No. Think. What else happened days after the Four Tails attack? Darui's expression transformed from limpid to somewhat serious. The Council Massacre. 24 of our most elite shinobi were massacred by an unknown assailant. She was able to get into the village completely undetected and was able to evade every single umbu and blockade. They slaughtered 24 out of the 26 members of our shinobi council. Furthermore, C looked at the black book in his hands seriously. They were strong enough to overpower a force of 9 umbu and 3 shinobi council members with relative ease. I know the details, Darui stated with mild irritation lacing his tone. And that's not even the worst part, C stated with a sigh. Because since that day, we have found no information on the whereabouts of Yujito Ni. It's like she vanished into thin air. Darui shook his head. What does it matter at this point? You want to confront him? C smiled ruefully. I like to think of the worst-case scenarios so I can most adequately prepare for any situation, doubly so when I'm facing an enemy, however. He clenched his fist. I feel like the worst-case scenario that I've come up with in regards to him leaves me with absolutely no options to counterattack, confronting him is suicide. A frigid voice spoke up beside them. C and Darui finally noticed Samui besides them, their mentor killer be hanging out behind her. Ah, you two are back, Darui stated in a bland tone. Finding a decent place to stay in this desert wasn't easy, Samui stated. But we finally found a place to lay so we can go and sleep there all day, hey. Killer Bee sang before he took out his notepad and jotted down some lyrics. Everyone, that was so bad. Samly ignored him and turned her gaze towards C. So? What do you plan on doing? Nothing, C stated as he closed his eyes and sighed. It's not like he'd say anything if we confronted him anyway. Best to just leave it be. We have very little information on him, to begin with. Samly gave a nod in agreement. Guys. Darui began before he pointed his finger towards where Yoru was standing. I think he's looking at us. Both C and Samly straightened their posture. Meanwhile, B was lost in his own world. Is he waving at me? C asked as he swallowed dryly. Darui nodded. Looks like it. Oh, he's smiling too. C took a step back in nervousness as sweat dripped down his forehead and he watched as Yoru eventually walked away. It was only then that he released the breath he hadn't known he was holding. I have a bad feeling about this, Samly, what do you think? When C got no reply, he blinked and looked to his left where he saw Samly staring at Yoru's disappearing form. He noted her slightly distracted gaze and noticed how her expression was slightly less cold. As a matter of fact, her face was just a bit rosier as well, and one could even say that her expression was just a tad bit warm. Samly? Samly blinked a couple of times, snapping out of whatever trance she was in before she stated in her usual detached tone. He's kind of cool. Yoru, gamer. We're here, Orochimaru stated as he guided us into a sand-colored room. The furniture and decor were simple, but the room seemed to contain all the space and accessories we would need. For the duration of the exam, we'll be staying here whenever you all aren't participating. In the meantime, I'll go register our team, so do what you will in the meantime. With that said, Orochimaru left us to our own devices as he left the room and burst away in a body flicker, leaving the three of us here. Seeing as there was nothing remotely interesting to do in this room, I walked towards the exit. Where do you plan on going? Kabuto asked as he adjusted his glasses. I shrugged. Nowhere in particular, but I figured I might as well explore the place since I've never been here before. Besides, I began as I stared at Livia with a smile. I'm interested in seeing what events will trigger by walking around the village. It'll be sure to be much more interesting than anything we could do in this room. Don't you agree, girl? Hiss. Ah, you're too adorable. In that case, Kabuto stated. I'll sneak around and gather more intel on our opposition. You most likely won't need it, but it will be an interesting pastime for me as well. I smiled lightly. That's the spirit. I turned to Itachi. What about you? I'll look for a place that sells Pocky. Itachi plainly stated before he walked out the door and flickered away to his destination. I blinked a few times. Huh, alright then. Just as I was about to leave, I immediately halted my body as I sensed a powerful and familiar kind of energy signature enter my detection range. It was a Bijuu's chakra signature. And it wasn't one I was familiar with. Livia, can you feel that? Hiss. I figured, I stated before I waved at Kabuto and flickered away. I found myself on one of Sunagakir's main roads and simply walked around, admiring the view. However, I had a goal in mind. I had already sensed the One Tail's chakra signature when I had entered this village, but it wasn't really noteworthy, and the 8 tails I had met before, but this new tailed beast chakra signature I was feeling. Well, it wouldn't hurt to check it out while doing other things. The Chunin exams weren't set to start for another day, so I could afford to take this time and search around a bit. Suna was one of the most sparsely populated great shinobi village, only next to Kirigakure. Despite this, the relatively small size of the village allowed Suna to appear much more crowded than it otherwise would have been, as its population density was quite large. With the mountain ranges surrounding the village and acting as a powerful natural barrier, it was no wonder Suna's founder picked this dry place as the foothold for his village. The only real issue was that Suna was located in a large desert and natural resources found it hard to make their way over here. It was really only thanks to the fourth Kazakage's gold dust manipulation that he was able to just barely provide enough capital for this village to prosper. If not, who knew how long it would be until Suna became broke? This was also one of the reasons he was considered to be one of Suna's greatest kages. I broke away from my thoughts as I arrived at what seemed to be some sort of marketplace. I knew I was currently at the center of the village, which predominantly contained many stores and wares. Despite this, I wasn't prepared for how overcrowded and busy this area of the village actually was. It seemed as if the Chunin exams was attracting more people than I had initially realized. I scanned the area for a bit before deciding that it wouldn't be a bad idea to pick up a souvenir or two for my darling little sis. I had the distinct feeling that she would be upset at my leaving without informing her. I mean, I had only really been informed about it last minute, so I hadn't the opportunity to tell her. Then again, I could have left a clone. I furrowed my brows. I suppose I'll need to get her more than 2 gifts, huh? Hiss. I did not fuck up, thank you very much. Hiss, hiss. Well, I'll make it up to her, I stated as I went through various stores in the marketplace and bought a few accessories and trinkets that I figured Mito would be interested in playing with. There was this doll that could be controlled like a puppet as long as you made your chakra flow through strings that were attached to it. I also got some hourglasses for her since those apparently were quite popular accessories to buy here. There were a few other things I bought as well. This should be enough to make it up to her, I stated as I took a mental sweep of my inventory. Abruptly, I perked up, having sensed the close proximity of the new tailed beast chakra signature I had discovered earlier. After paying for my wares, I stepped out of the store and jumped to the higher vantage point of a nearby building before scanning through the dense sea of incoming people in order to pinpoint who had that chakra signature. It took but a moment for me to catch a glimpse of the Jinchuriki that had grabbed my attention. The Jinchuriki in question was a thin young man with pale golden eyes and brown hair that reached his shoulders. He wore a full-body gray suit along with a flak jacket which had very low shoulder guards as well as a zipper and a pouch on the upper right chest. He also wore fingerless gloves, as well as bandages on his forearms. From the forehead protector on his head, I could see that he was from Kirigakure. He wasn't alone. In addition, next to him was a tall and noticeably muscular man with light grayish skin, short spiky black hair, dark brown eyes, and small eyebrows. He wore bandages like a mask over the bottom half of his face, and on his back he carried a weapon I recognized from images and other illustrations. The Kubikira Bocho, one of the weapons belonging to the 7 ninja swordsmen of the mist. There was also a noticeably older person in the group who looked to be a man in his early 30s. He had blue hair which was styled in a moused-up manner. His left eye was blue and his right eye was covered with an eye patch, and he wore a talisman in each ear with the kanji for to hear, written on them twice on each side. I glanced at the last member of the team. Immediately after, my eyes twinkled in interest. Oh ho! Isn't she a beauty? The girl in question had fair skin, green eyes, and long auburn hair styled into a herringbone pattern at the back. She had 2 short bangs in the front, one of which covered one of her eyes. Tied around her midsection was a waistband with a metal plate engraved on which were Kirigakure symbols. The group of 4 talked for a moment before separating and going their own way. The woman decided to walk close to my area where the various outdoor stores were. Did you see her, Livia? I asked as I tried to peek through the crowd once more. She was quite beautiful, wasn't she? Of course, not nearly as beautiful as myself, but... I could almost feel Livia roll her eyes. Well, forget what you think, cause she's definitely got my attention now, I stated before hopping off of my vantage point and making my way towards that beautiful-looking woman. Well, I'm going in. Make sure you act cute like you usually do. Livia simply closed her eyes and ignored me. I shook my head. You're a terrible wingman, or is it wing snake? With that, I walked towards her while eyeing the crowd of people around me. The thing about a country with such little wealth like Suna was that there were a lot of undesirable types around these types of places. Like... My hand shot forward and instantly grabbed onto the wrist of the boy who had just tried to pickpocket me. Yo! I said with a smile as I looked at the kid who couldn't be more than a year or so older than me. With his shaggy clothes, dirty face, and loose footwear. I could sense the fear growing within him as he struggled to release himself from my hold. Let go. I wasn't doing nothing. I raised a brow at his reaction before I shook my head in amusement. Sure you weren't, but I don't care about that. I just need you to help me with something. He stopped his struggles and eyed me suspiciously. What? I smirked. Trail behind me. In a few moments, a woman is going to trip and I'm going to go help her. That moment is going to be your window of opportunity to put your skills to good use on both of us. With that said, I took out a thick wad of Rio from my inventory and snuck it into the kid's hands. Here's some incentive. The best part is that you have nothing to lose. How about it? The kid froze at such large numbers of notes before he gripped it tightly and looked me in the eye. From his emotions, I got the answer I wanted. Now then, let's get the show on the road, shall we? Looking ahead, I could still see the auburn-haired girl looking about at the various local stores, so I waded through the crowd while also keeping my senses on the little thief behind me. I inched closer and closer to her, and just as we were a couple of feet away, with a small and subtle application of chakra, a small bump appeared on the ground in front of the girl. I knew that with her shinobi training she would be able to recover very quickly, so as soon as she tripped over the rock and gave an adorable yelp, I dashed forward. In one smooth motion, I caught her from the front and gave a genial smile. Are you all right? You have to be careful on these roads. They aren't maintained often. I didn't need your. She paused as she stared at my face and blanked for a moment. Help! I could sense the subtle shift in her emotions as she took a look at me, some of which appeared to be favorable towards me. Gently helping her up off the ground, I stared into her eyes, and in the same moment, the little thief brushed by both me the girl. All according to Kikaku. I'm sure you didn't, I stated before I tilted my head. You're definitely not from around here, are you? I asked, looking at her waistband. She dusted herself off. You don't look like a native yourself, she stated as she looked at the Konoha headband around my neck. That may be true, but I know a lot about the rules of places like this. Exhibit A. I began as I gestured towards the little thief that had almost completely disappeared into the crowd. That kid that bumped into you and me just tried to score from us. Eyes widened in surprise and annoyance, the girl hurriedly searched herself, however, it all seemed fruitless. Shit! She said, grinding her teeth as she looked into the crowd where the kid had disappeared from while vapor visibly emanated from her body. Interesting, I stated as I looked at her rising anger in mild amusement. She turned to me with narrowed eyes. You don't look surprised or worried. I told you. I began, before in a puff, a wallet appeared in my hand. I know the rules of this place. I finished before I made it disappear in a puff. Storage seals come in handy in these kinds of places, especially if you're a foreigner in these areas. Standing out makes you an easy target. Of course, I kept my money inside my inventory and not a storage seal, but she didn't need to know that little tidbit of information. The plume of smoke was just a little extra effect. Cooling herself down, the girl took a breath and sighed in disappointment. And here I was hoping I would be able to get something interesting in this place. Well, why don't I take you around? I suggested. We can explore together and you can get whatever you want. It'll be on me. Placing a finger to her lip, she looked at me with a smile of intrigue. You think you can buy me? No, a woman such as yourself can't be bought, I stated. But that doesn't mean I can't afford to show you a good time. How about it? What do you have to lose? She stared at my face intently and stepped closer to me before smiling. I suppose spending my time with someone such as yourself will be worthwhile. She began. Mei Terumi. Nice to meet you. Shining Beauty, I stated, referencing the meaning of her name. It truly fits you. Well, aren't you a charmer, May stated before she subtly licked her lips. And you're definitely charming. Yoro, I stated before looking at my adorable partner wrapped around my arm. And this here is Livia. As if responding to my words, Livia snapped open one of her eyes and stared at May for a moment before losing interest and closing it. May eyed Livia curiously. She's beautiful, she stated as she reached out to stroke Livia's scales. Livia, being the lazy snake she was, didn't even bother to respond. After a moment, May stopped with a smile on her face and looked at me. Shall we then, Yoru? Most definitely. So together, May and I walked through the busy streets of Sunagakir's marketplace. Along the way, I took an extra peek at her. She appeared to be a few years older than me, probably around Rin's and Kakashi's age, and had a mature edge to her. Just my type. Not only that, she was incredibly beautiful. Even though I had eidetic memory and had already committed her form to memory, I could help but sneak another peek at her. Immediately, I snapped out of it. Stupid hormones. Shaking my head, I recomposed myself before asking. Tell me something, I asked. How's Kiri doing these days? If I didn't know any better, I'd say you only asked me out for information, she said in mock seriousness. I shook my head. I find you much more interesting than your village. I'm just a bit curious is all. Is that so? Well, where to start? She slightly looked up and thought. Ever since we lost the Three Tails and a lot of the Seven Swordsmen, we've been lying low and trying to away from the other great shinobi villages' affairs. She then perked up and grabbed my hand before dragging me to a food stand where they sold spicy takoyaki. One batch please. Make that two, I stated as I placed down my money on the table. The chef nodded and served up some of the takoyaki that had just been fried into 2 paper bowls. After we took it from him, we continued on. But you're here now and I'm venturing for the Chunin exams, I stated. Are you a teen's Jonin overseer? She looked at me in amusement after swallowing the food she had eaten. No, I'm participating. What? It must have been the very subtle pause that tipped her off as she asked. You seem surprised. Why so? For starters, from your posture and movements, I can tell you're skilled, at the bare minimum skilled enough to be above a genin. You seem to have the age and experience. It's not good to comment on a woman's age, she stated as she took a takoyaki ball and fed it to me. I obliged and ate it. Well, it's not really a secret anyway, May said dismissively. I was a jonin, but my kage demoted me and my teammates to genin due to our disappointing failure in completing an essential mission, but I blinked and swallowed my food. That's a thing? Of course, she stated as she fed me once more. As long as you have some pretense, your kage can strip out of your ninja rank. Of course, this sort of thing doesn't happen often, if at all. Usually, shinobi who fail so terribly as to get demoted are either kicked out or killed. Then why? May leaned in close with a smile and fed me once more. For the Chunin exams, of course. You know, when I had earlier told Kushina that it wouldn't matter even if the other villages sent fake genin, I never actually thought I would be facing them. However, as before, it didn't matter to me. Though, it did make me wonder. Why would their kage go through all that trouble just to have his elite shinobi beat up on kids during this year's Chunin exams? Ah, I suppose someone from Konoha would understand it, especially someone such as yourself. I didn't quite catch the hidden meaning in the second part of her sentence, but she continued in nonetheless. For the last few years, the trend has been heavily favoring Konoha. We lost our bijou to you, Kumo's 2 tails vanished, Suna has always been poor, and IWA also lost their 4 tails. Yeah, it's a pity the third Tsuchikage died protecting Konoha and taking the 4 tails with him. She gave me this look. Right? She shook her head in amusement. Anyway, as a result, the amount of missions being sent our way has drastically reduced, negatively impacting our economy. I imagine it's the same for IWA, Kumo, and Suna. Huh, I never thought of that. Then, I understood. I see, so in order to attract more individuals your way, Kiri needed to send out an exceptional genin team which would capture the attention of all the sponsors. Correct. Here's your reward. She stated as she fed me a few more takoyaki. I don't doubt the other villages are doing this as well. As a matter of fact, I would wager they have people with incredibly high experience now posing as a genin. Ho! Isn't that interesting? May shrugged. It was almost like a mutual agreement that all these other villages did this, so it's not like the main competition was going to be between actual genin anyway. Showing off our ninja's worth is the only way to get missions, and as a shinobi village, missions are the main way we generate our revenue. I see, I stated. Yeah, well, I don't believe we're going to get the result we hoped for now. I raised a brow. Why not? May paused and stared into my eyes intently before she smiled. Call it women's intuition. Right? She looked at me in amusement and grabbed my arm before dragging me all around the marketplace. While being made to buy all the things May could get her hands on, I asked, tell me more about you yourself. Why exactly were you chosen to be demoted to genin? Let's see. She said as she picked out a necklace. I'm skilled. I could have guessed. Additionally, she continued while she placed the gold necklace around her neck and pursed her lips slightly. I have some abilities that may help me win this thing. My interest was piqued. I was willing to bet she had an interesting bloodline ability that gave her this extra boost in confidence she was emanating. That'll be 280,283 Rio. The cashier stated. I didn't even bat an eye as I placed the goods in a storage tag and moved to take out my wallet, however, May stopped me from doing so. I'll handle this, May stated as, under my mildly surprised vision, she pulled out a small pouch from which she took out wads of Rio. After counting the money, she placed the cash on the counter. Here you go. Thank you. The cashier stated with a smile as he put the money away, his mood uplifted. With that, May took the storage tag from my hands. I forgot to tell you that I know about the rules of these kinds of places as well. She said as she snapped her wallet shut and gave me a teasing smile. Don't think I've never gone out to places like these in the many years of my career. I raised a brow, though I couldn't say I was too surprised. It would be weird if she had never been in a place like his in her career as a shinobi. Truthfully, the little thief had only been an opportunity to approach her. It did get me wondering though. Then, the infamous Yorodon goes through all that trouble to ask me out and you expect me to decline? Do you know how many people want to dig up your secrets? She asked before chuckling lightly. I found myself more amused than upset, and since I found you very cute, I went along with it. I hadn't expected I was so popular. I mean, sure, my name was in the bingo book, but it wasn't like I went out much. When I did go out, it was either to meet people I was already acquainted with or to kill people during missions, so it wasn't like they had much to say about me. Thank you for today, Yoro, I had fun. We should definitely do this again sometime. May suggested before leaning forward and planting a kiss on my cheek. I felt a surge of heat generated from where she placed her lips. I'll see you at the exams. She then stood up and gave me a wink before she moved to walk out of the store. I looked at her retreating backside and focused on her shapely legs, the mesh leggings covering them accentuating her thighs even further. I immediately snapped out of it as May walked past the curtain of the store and disappeared from my view. Oh, for fuck's sake. I just could not seem to get her image out of my head. Ever since I had started going through these changes, I had been questioning whether Gamer's mind was broken. Was Gamer's body making it so bad that Gamer's mind couldn't act effectively? Honestly, Levia, you're lucky you don't have to go through puberty. I paused. Wait, do snakes go through puberty? Hiss? I know you're only 2, but you're almost 3. I paused as I rethought that sentence before I sighed. You know what? Forget I said anything about it. Livia readily hissed in agreement. With that, I walked out of the store and looked up to the sky before narrowing my eyes. You know, they are actually getting quite annoying, wouldn't you agree? Livia's slitted pupils constricted dangerously as she hissed in displeasure. I know, I said, looking around the bustling market area. I don't like the way they're looking at me either. For a while now, a little bit before I met May, there had been some peculiar gazes directed at my person. It made sense why that was the case and I didn't bother since not all of them were hostile, but by now the number of gazes had increased by so much that I was getting irritated. It was like I was on a stage and the audience was staring at me as if I was an interesting prop. I didn't like it one bit. Hiss. You're right. A few people might have to die before they leave me alone. I turned my gaze in the direction where I could sense a particularly high level of hostility. ID create, empty. I dashed towards the place where that high level of hostility was emanating from and made sure I was behind where the purported aggressors were hiding. ID escape. I saw the backs of 3 individuals in front of me. Their gazes were turning every which way as if they were looking for something. Or someone. With my high level of stealth and my ability to perfectly suppress my chakra, they didn't even notice I was behind them until I grabbed the heads of 2 of the individuals and brutally slammed them together. They were out cold in an instant, and before the third person could even comprehend the situation he was in, Livia shot out and coiled around him, constricting his body and preventing him from moving. I know I'm incredibly charming, but by how you've been staring at me, I don't think it's about my looks. I asked behind the man's ears. To my surprise, I could sense little fear from the man. Instead, he turned to me with a wide smile. You're fucked. You're fucked. Do you have any idea how many people want your head? You actually decided to show yourself and in the Chunin exams of all places? Ha 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 ha. He laughed madly. I furrowed my brows as I saw the Awagakure symbol on his headband before I sighed. To be honest, I don't really care. Saying so, I grabbed his neck. You can die now. His laugh abruptly halted as he looked at me in surprise. Wait. Don't you want to dash? No. I crushed his neck, killing him instantly. After I let go and Livia uncoiled herself from him, his body slumped to the floor motionless. I killed the other 2 with a quick application of laserfinger before they began to glow. They turned into motes of light which I absorbed through my mouth. I could sense that no one had seen or noted what had happened here since it had been quick and quiet. Nevertheless, I wasn't going to stay here for too long. My eyes narrowed dangerously. This Chunin exam apparently wouldn't be as simple as I first thought. There were still a few more days till it officially began, more than enough time for information about me to be relayed and for the villages to make some moves against me. That being said, I wasn't worried. Let's go home, Livia. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.